The stars had always been our guides, our symbols of hope. We looked to the heavens with awe, imagining that perhaps one day, humanity would take its place among the cosmos. But what we didn't know was that when the galaxy called upon Earth to kneel, we wouldn't be ready. We were not prepared for what arrived in the cold of space that night. It started with a flicker of shadow in the sky, barely noticeable to the naked eye, a glimmer in the black void. But as days passed, that flicker grew, and something dark began to unfold across the heavens. An armada, vast beyond imagination, appeared without warning, descending on Earth like a tide of steel and shadow. They called it the Midnight Armada. No one knew who they were or where they came from, but their arrival was undeniable. Massive ships, shaped like nothing we had ever seen before, filled the sky. Some hovered silently, while others seemed to pulse with energy, almost alive. And then, as quickly as they appeared, the stars themselves began to dim, as if the very fabric of the universe was being choked out. It was as if the galaxy itself had turned its back on us. Humanity's place in the cosmos was now in question, and the message was clear. We were no longer the masters of our own fate. We had been summoned, and we were powerless to resist. On the ground, panic spread like wildfire. Governments scrambled to make sense of the situation, but all communications were disrupted. The skies had been taken from us. Soldiers, diplomats, scientists, no one had answers. The Midnight Armada didn't speak. They didn't need to. Their ships, with their cold, imposing structures, sent a message far louder than any words could. Earth was now theirs to command. Some thought it was a test. Others believed it was an invasion. But no one could have predicted how quickly the stars themselves would burn. The very constellations we had charted for centuries were being erased, swallowed up by darkness. What was once our guiding light was now a signal that something far greater, far older had come for us. As the days turned into weeks, humanity's spirit began to fray. People started to give up hope. What could we possibly do against beings capable of bending the universe to their will? Was there any way to fight back? Or had we, for all our technological advancement, reached the limits of our power? The air was thick with tension, each new day leaving us with more questions than answers. And then, just as the last glimmers of light from the stars began to fade, something unexpected happened. A lone voice, a whisper in the chaos, began to rise above the rest. Someone had found a way to communicate with them. But what would that conversation bring? Would humanity bow to the will of the Midnight Armada, or would we find a way to stand tall against the unimaginable forces that had come to claim our world? The answer, it seemed, was still waiting in the dark. The voice that claimed it could reach the Midnight Armada came from a small research station on the edge of a quiet coastal town. For days, the place had been silent, its equipment worn down from overuse as scientists tried everything to break through the interference. But then, out of nowhere, a faint signal slipped through the noise, soft, almost trembling, as if it had traveled an impossible distance just to be heard. At first, no one believed it. People dismissed it as static or a glitch. But the message repeated, steady and intentional. Someone or something was reaching back. The scientist behind the discovery was a quiet figure. Someone who had spent years studying deep space frequencies long before the Midnight Armada appeared. Their colleagues said they had always felt something was out there, something waiting. But even they looked shaken as the signal played through the speakers, filling the small room with a strange rhythm that didn't match any known pattern. The team tried translating it, breaking it down, analyzing every tone. But the message remained a puzzle, complex, layered, and unnervingly calm. It sounded less like a threat and more like an invitation, or a warning. As word spread, desperate leaders from across the world demanded answers. People crowded into streets, staring at the dimmed sky where the great ships hung like frozen shadows. News channels replayed the intercepted signal over and over, hoping someone would recognize its meaning. Some believed it was a countdown. Others claimed it was a test of humanity's unity. A few insisted it was a demand for surrender. But behind all the theories, one truth remained clear. The Midnight Armada was waiting for something from us. Meanwhile, strange changes began happening across Earth. Tides shifted in unnatural patterns. Magnetic fields bent and twisted. Entire cities experienced moments of sudden silence, as if sound itself had been pulled away. Animals moved in odd migrations, fleeing from places where nothing seemed visibly wrong. Scientists were overwhelmed. Nothing followed the laws they knew. It was as though the presence of the Armada was reshaping the world, inch by inch, without ever firing a single shot. Humanity had never felt so small, so uncertain. People clung to any explanation that made sense. Some believed the galaxy had laws we had unknowingly broken, that Earth had been summoned for judgment. Others whispered about ancient signals humanity had ignored. Warnings scattered among the stars that we were too inexperienced to understand. And still, the ships remained motionless above us, their dark surfaces reflecting what little light remained. The scientists who found the signal knew there had to be more. They spent sleepless nights replaying the audio, convinced they were missing something vital. Each time the message looped, they felt a strange weight growing in the room, as if the Armada was listening back, as if it was waiting for us to respond correctly. Then, one night, the signal changed. The pattern shifted slightly, as if reacting to something on Earth, and a soft pulse rippled across every device tuned to it. It wasn't just noise anymore. It felt almost like a voice emerging from a long silence, trying to speak through layers of distance. The scientist froze, heart pounding, realizing what this meant. The Midnight Armada wasn't just watching. It wasn't just demanding. It was communicating directly, intentionally. But what it was saying, that remained locked in the unknown, hanging heavily over a world already on the edge of fear. And before anyone could decode it, the sky above Earth began to glow again, faintly, like the stars were trying to return, or like something else was waking behind them. As the days passed, the atmosphere on Earth grew heavier, thick with uncertainty. People felt the pressure building, as if something unseen was pushing them toward an unknown future. The governments of the world had no answers, only conflicting theories and fractured alliances. Some believed the Midnight Armada was here to purge Earth of its failures, to wipe the slate clean. Others insisted that humanity was being tested for a greater purpose, a trial for the next stage of evolution. But there were those, darker voices, who feared the ships were preparing for something much worse. And with every passing moment, it felt like the edge of the abyss was drawing closer. In the midst of all this chaos, the scientists who first intercepted the signal found themselves caught in a race against time. They had made the mistake of letting others hear the signal before they could fully understand it. The world had grabbed hold of it, each government, each faction, trying to extract meaning from the message. The pressure was suffocating. But now, in the quiet of their lab, the scientists began to understand something that made their blood run cold. The signal wasn't just a call, it was a map that pointed to something deeper, hidden in the very core of Earth itself. It was an unsettling thought, the idea that whatever the Midnight Armada sought might not lie among the stars at all, but beneath our feet. The scientists dug deeper into the data, cross-referencing ancient texts, old myths, and forgotten histories. They found traces of symbols and language embedded in the signal patterns that seemed strangely familiar, like echoes of something humanity had long abandoned. What if the Armada's arrival wasn't about conquering Earth, but about reclaiming something lost, something buried deep in our planet's history? Across the world, whispers of ancient prophecies grew louder. In a small village, an old man spoke of a time when the stars would burn and the heavens would open, bringing with them the judgment of the ancient ones. In a major city, an historian uncovered a long-forgotten manuscript detailing a final visitation from the stars, one that spoke of an order, a universal law that would one day demand Earth's submission. These scattered stories, written off as myth for centuries, suddenly felt less like coincidence and more like warning signs. Meanwhile, tensions were rising. Military forces, once scattered in their responses, began to converge in places of strategic importance. Governments and factions that had once argued over trivial matters now united under one banner: survival. The idea that the Armada's arrival could be a form of judgment or reckoning spurred a dangerous fervor. Some argued that submission was the only option if humanity was to preserve any hope of peace. Others, desperate to prove Earth's worth, began to form resistance groups, using whatever technology they had left to study the enemy. But these efforts felt futile. The Armada's presence remained overwhelming, as if they were untouchable, moving only when they chose to. And amidst all the fear, there were those who didn't see the Midnight Armada as a threat at all. A growing movement of idealists believed that the arrival of these beings was humanity's chance to ascend, to join a greater galactic community. They spoke of peace, of a universal alliance that could break down the barriers between Earth and the stars. They argued that the key to survival was not resistance, but cooperation. Yet even their voices were drowned out by the tension, drowned out by the fear of those who saw the Armada's ships as harbingers of something far darker. It was in this maelstrom of conflicting beliefs and rising chaos that the scientists made their breakthrough. The signal was no longer just a message, it was a command. The Armada was not waiting for humanity to kneel. They were waiting for us to take a step forward, to recognize the truth hidden within the Earth itself. But what would happen if humanity failed to understand this? What would the Armada do if we continued to resist, to cling to our old ways of thinking? The scientists' heart pounded as they realized the implications. The Armada wasn't just an outside force, they were connected to something far older than even they could fathom. And the question remained, could humanity truly evolve in time, or would we perish beneath the weight of our own ignorance? Caught between the stars and the planet we once thought we understood, the nights had grown darker, the stars now almost entirely consumed by the shadow of the Armada. Earth had never felt so small, so insignificant. Governments had locked down their borders, and military forces were preparing for a conflict no one knew how to fight. The resistance had grown, their numbers swelling with those who could no longer sit in silence. But the problem was, no one knew what they were resisting. The Midnight Armada had not fired a single shot. They had not even moved from their positions in the sky. And yet, the world was on the brink of collapse. It was in these moments, as panic spread and the air grew thick with fear, that the scientists' discovery finally came to light. The ancient symbols embedded in the signal were not just a map. They were a code, an invitation, or perhaps a warning. But the more they studied it, the more it became clear there was something under Earth's surface that the Armada wanted, something humanity had long forgotten. Every clue pointed toward an area deep beneath the Arctic Circle, a location so remote, so buried in secrecy, that even the most advanced technology could not reveal its true purpose. But as the scientists tried to warn the authorities, the world's leaders were already moving toward a dangerous conclusion. A decision had been made. The global summit convened to discuss the next steps, but it was clear to everyone in the room that they were not discussing what humanity could do to survive. They were debating how they could best submit to the Armada. The fear of annihilation had taken root so deeply in the hearts of the world's leaders that surrender seemed like the only option. Some wanted to make peace, others wanted to negotiate, and a few were determined to bring the fight to the Armada, no matter the cost. But no one knew what they were truly facing. It was then that the scientists made the boldest decision of all. They couldn't sit back and let humanity make the wrong choice. Armed with their findings, they set out for the Arctic themselves, intending to reach the source of the signal, the place the Armada's arrival had been guiding them toward. They didn't have much time. The closer the Armada drew, the more the world seemed to tremble. Earth itself felt alive with fear, its crust shifting beneath the pressure of something ancient awakening. As the scientists journeyed to the Arctic, they were not alone. They were followed by a small group of military personnel, members of the resistance who had finally understood that the answer didn't lie in fighting the Armada, but in uncovering what was hidden beneath the ice. But even as they approached their destination, strange things began happening. The ground shook unnaturally, as if something deep within Earth was stirring, responding to the presence of the Armada. The air grew colder, and the magnetic fields that had already been in turmoil began to intensify. Each step closer to the site felt like they were stepping deeper into the unknown. The group arrived at a massive cavern, hidden beneath miles of ice, and what they found there was beyond anything they could have imagined. A colossal structure, ancient and covered in alien symbols, lay beneath the frozen expanse. It looked as if it had been waiting for centuries, or even millennia. The markings on the walls were eerily familiar. They matched the patterns in the signal. This was the source. The Armada had not come to conquer. They had come to reclaim something. But as they made their way deeper into the cavern, the tension in the air became almost unbearable. The ground trembled again, louder this time, and a low hum echoed from the walls. The scientists felt a surge of fear, but also something else, something they couldn't explain. A pull, like an invisible force drawing them closer to the heart of the structure. And just as they reached the center, a sudden, deafening noise shook the ground beneath their feet, and the sky above seemed to crack open. The Armada had moved. In that moment, everything changed. The air around them thickened with energy. The hum from deep within the structure grew louder, vibrating through their bones. And then, just as quickly as it began, everything went silent. The ground beneath them froze. The air became still, and the lights of the world flickered out. All eyes turned to the sky. The ships that had once hung motionless above Earth now began to descend, slowly, deliberately. And as they did, a bright, intense light erupted from the structure deep beneath the ice, illuminating the darkness. The Armada was no longer waiting. They were coming for Earth, and nothing could stop them now. The climax was drawing near. The ground rumbled again, this time with a force that sent shockwaves through the air. The lights of the world blinked out one by one, and for a brief, terrifying moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. The Armada was descending slowly, deliberately toward the very spot where the scientist and the small group of military personnel stood, frozen beneath the unnatural light that now poured from the cavern's heart. It was as though the Armada had been waiting for this exact moment, this perfect alignment between their ships and the ancient structure beneath the ice. But just as the first massive ship broke through the clouds, casting its long shadow across the frozen ground, a sound like thunder cracked the air. It came from the very heart of the structure, an enormous metallic groan that resonated through the earth itself. The scientists felt their chest tighten. Something was wrong. This wasn't just an awakening, it was an activation, and as the noise grew louder, the walls of the cavern began to tremble violently. The ships above them weren't the only threat. The true danger lay within the ice itself. The military personnel took a step back, weapons raised in a defensive stance, but even they seemed uncertain. They hadn't been prepared for this. The scientists, however, felt a growing sense of realization. The Armada had not come to Earth merely to reclaim a piece of their past. They had come to unlock it, and the terrible truth hit them all at once. The structure wasn't just a relic, it was a weapon. Before anyone could react, the ground split open beneath them, and a blinding flash of light erupted from the depths of the cavern. The ice shattered, the ancient stone structure cracked in half, and a colossal energy pulse shot into the sky, piercing the clouds. It was as if the earth itself had just opened its wounds, and now everything was about to bleed out. The Armada, suspended above, had not interfered with the pulse. They were simply waiting. They had known. This had all been part of the plan. The scientists stumbled backward, their mind reeling from the revelation. The Armada had not simply come for Earth's submission. They had come to unlock something far worse in energy, an ancient power so vast and destructive that it could tear the fabric of the universe itself apart. The pulse had activated something deep within the structure, something far more dangerous than anything humanity could have ever anticipated. The energy that had surged from the ground was not just a signal, it was an invitation. But to whom? As the pulse faded, the sky above the scientists' group began to shimmer, like an invisible curtain had been pulled back. The air grew thick, and a low, ominous hum filled the atmosphere. Something was coming through, something far more powerful than anything Earth had ever seen. The Armada had been waiting for it. They were not the invaders, they were the hum, and now they were preparing Earth for its true fate. Suddenly, the air crackled, and the first of the ships lowered even further, its massive form cutting through the fog. But this time, there was something different. As the light from the ships bathed the group in an eerie glow, the scientists realized that they were not simply observing the ships, they were connected to them, tied together in a way that went beyond logic, beyond science. It wasn't just technology at play here. It was something far older, something tied to the very fabric of Earth itself in that moment. The scientists understood what the Armada had come to reclaim, not just a part of their past, but a power that could reshape the entire galaxy. And Earth, for all its technological advancements, had been standing on a dormant well of it. Humanity had unknowingly built its civilizations atop something that had been waiting to be awakened. But before they could make sense of it, a second pulse shot up from the structure, brighter and more intense than the first. And this time it wasn't just energy. It was a signal, one that carried with it an unmistakable message. The galaxy is watching, and Earth has just been marked. The ships began to descend faster, their engines vibrating through the ground. The scientist, standing on the edge of a precipice, knew the truth now. Whatever Earth was about to face, it wasn't just the Armada. It was something far greater, and the countdown to humanity's fate had just begun. The pulse from the structure vibrated through the scientist's chest, and for the first time they felt an overwhelming sense of fear, not just for themselves, but for all of humanity. The Armada's ships were descending faster now, their massive forms blocking out the sky, their engines roaring in sync with the rising hum of the ancient power that had been unleashed. The air was thick with anticipation, and for a brief moment, everything felt as if it were hanging in balance. The ground trembled beneath them, and it seemed as though the very world was holding its breath. The scientists knew what was coming. The signal had been sent, and Earth was marked. But the question remained: who had received it, and what would happen next? In the distance, the first of the ships landed with a deafening crash, sending a shockwave that splintered the ice around the cavern's entrance. The group scrambled back, barely escaping the blast radius. The light from the ship flared, revealing the strange, otherworldly form of its hull. But the scientists didn't look at the ship. They were focused on the ground beneath their feet. The energy pulse had shifted. Something was moving beneath the Earth itself. It wasn't just the Armada that had come for Earth, it was the thing they had awakened. The power buried beneath the ice, waiting to be released. As the scientist and the remaining soldiers stood in stunned silence, a figure emerged from the depths of the structure. At first it looked like a shadow, a tall, humanoid figure cloaked in darkness. But as it stepped into the light, it revealed itself to be something far more unsettling, an ancient being, covered in symbols that glowed with the same strange energy that had pulsed through the Earth. It wasn't a creature of flesh and blood, it was something made of pure, living energy, a manifestation of the very force that had been buried beneath Earth's surface for millennia. The Armada's ships had not come to Earth to conquer it. They had come to release this being, to bring it into the universe once more. The scientist's heart pounded in their chest. This was the true power the Armada had been seeking all along, the ancient force that had been hidden beneath the planet, waiting for its moment to rise again. The figure raised its arms, and the ground cracked open wider, sending a burst of energy that swept across the barren landscape. The atmosphere seemed to warp as the sky turned from dark to light, as if the fabric of reality itself was bending. The Armada ships didn't land, they seemed to merge with the figure, their engines dimming as they fused into its form. It was an impossible sight, a union of technology and ancient energy, a power that Earth could never have prepared for. The scientist's mind raced. The message had been clear all along. Earth wasn't just a planet caught in the crossfire of a galactic war, it was a vessel for the ancient being that had been bound beneath the ice, a being that had once ruled the stars before being imprisoned by forces unknown. The Armada hadn't come to conquer Earth, they had come to awaken their god. But just as the being began to rise, its energy crackling, something unexpected happened. The sky overhead rippled again, but this time it wasn't the Armada's ships that reacted. A new force appeared, cutting through the atmosphere like a comet. A second fleet, different from the Armada, emerged from the Voida fleet, unlike anything the Earth had seen before. Their ships were sleek and elegant, pulsating with a soft, calming light, and their descent was smooth, almost peaceful. As the new fleet settled in the air above the scientist and their team, a voice, soft but commanding, echoed through the frozen landscape. It wasn't a language they knew, but it was a language they understood. The voice spoke not to the scientist, but to the ancient being below. And in that moment, the scientist understood. The being wasn't a god. It wasn't a force of nature. It was a prisoner, a being that had been contained for a reason. And now, it had broken free. The new fleet didn't attack. They didn't fire weapons. Instead, their ships seemed to contain the energy radiating from the being, siphoning it in a way that made it powerless. The ancient being roared in fury, its energy flaring, but the Second Fleet's ships were unyielding. Slowly, painfully, the power was drained, and the being that had once threatened to engulf Earth in chaos began to lose its strength as the last of the energy was drawn out. The figure collapsed, its form flickering and fading until it dissolved into nothingness. The world went silent again, the hum of power replaced by an eerie stillness. The scientists didn't know who these new beings were, but one thing was certain: they had saved Earth. The Armada had not come to enslave humanity. They had come to release something ancient and dangerous. But in the end, the universe had its own way of maintaining balance. And as the final ship of the new fleet vanished into the sky, leaving nothing but a trail of stardust, the scientists realized something more. Earth's true place in the galaxy had just begun, not as a subject, not as a prisoner, but as a keeper of ancient secrets. And in the quiet aftermath, they couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The silence that followed the disappearance of the Second Fleet hung in the air, heavy and filled with an unspoken understanding. The energy that had once surged so violently through Earth was gone, drained into the void, leaving only a faint tremor in the atmosphere. The ancient being, once a terror, a force of unimaginable power, had been returned to its prison, sealed once more, and the Earth, it seemed, had been spared from a fate far worse than anyone could have predicted. The scientist, standing amidst the frozen remnants of the shattered cavern, I felt the weight of everything that had just transpired. They had come to the Arctic to uncover answers, to try and understand what the Armada had truly wanted. But in the end, it wasn't just about finding answers, it was about surviving. And surviving, they realized, was a far more complex task than any of them had ever understood. As the world slowly began to heal, so too did the people of Earth. The cities that had once been paralyzed by fear slowly began to breathe again. The news outlets that had once broadcasted endless warnings about the Armada's arrival now reported something new: peace. But it wasn't just the peace of surviving an invasion, it was the peace of knowing that Earth had become a pivotal point in a much larger story, a story that stretched far beyond the borders of the planet, into the vastness of the galaxy itself. But even as life began to return to a sense of normalcy, the questions lingered. The Armada's ships were gone, but the Second Fleet had left no trace. No one knew who they were, where they had come from, or why they had chosen to intervene. There were whispers of ancient civilizations, of races that had watched over the universe for eons. Some believed that Earth had simply been a small part of a much grander cosmic plan, one that would unfold in ways no one could predict. A scientist, though, wasn't focused on the mysteries that remained. Their mind kept returning to one simple truth: Earth was no longer alone. Humanity had been thrust into a much larger, more complex reality than they had ever imagined. The signal from the Armada had not just been a call for submission, it had been a summons to be part of something greater. The alien beings, the ancient power beneath the ice, the ships from beyond the stars, they were all part of a delicate balance, a balance that humanity now found itself at the center of. And as the scientists walked away from the ruins of the cavern, they couldn't help but wonder what would happen next. The universe was vast, and Earth had just become a key player in its ongoing story. Would humanity rise to meet the challenge, or would they falter, lost in the uncertainty of the unknown? Only time would tell. Only time would tell, but the truth was clear: survival was only the beginning. Humanity had learned a harsh lesson. The galaxy was watching, and the stakes were higher than they had ever imagined. The question now wasn't just about what Earth could do, it was about what Earth would become. The scientist paused at the edge of the horizon, the stars now visible again in the dark sky. They knew the journey wasn't over, it was only just beginning, and somewhere, deep in the cosmos, other beings were waiting, watching, wondering what Earth would do next.